The day my first love publicly confessed his love to the real heiress, I awakened to the plot. In the original story, as the fake heiress, I would cause a big scene and eventually be rejected by my first love, ending my life. But until the confession ended, I didn't appear. Because at that moment, I was wearing his shirt, sitting on his brother's bed with bare legs, innocently teasing. "How can I make it up to you?" His usually arrogant and indifferent brother blushed slightly, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Button up your shirt, I'll take care of the sheets." 1. The night Victor publicly confessed to the real heiress. He specifically asked everyone to keep me a secret. But he didn't know that I had no intention of going. In the original story, as the cannon fodder female lead and the fake heiress, I had admired Victor for many years, regarding him as my white knight. Until Victor fell head over heels for the real heiress and publicly confessed his love in the mall. Everyone thought I was going to make a huge scene. No one wanted to miss this kind of wealthy family drama. They were all waiting for me to lose control and rush over to cause a commotion. Unfortunately, until Victor's successful confession ended, I didn't appear. The crowd watching was packed, but everyone looked disappointed. Even Victor didn't have much joy on his face. He hugged his new girlfriend and checked his phone. Not a single call or message. Victor frowned slightly. Then he said to the crowd, "I'll pay for everything tonight, everyone here." The crowd cheered. I walked out of the coffee shop on the second floor of the mall and slowly approached the edge of the crowd. Someone in the crowd had sharp eyes and shouted, "Look, Lilith is here. Now there's going to be a good show. She's finally here." Victor looked up sharply and met my gaze, his lips curling slightly. I ignored the gazes of the people watching. I walked straight up to Victor. "Lilith." Victor tightened his arm around his new girlfriend. He looked at me and said calmly, "You can't force feelings. We've grown up together, and I don't want to say anything too harsh that would hurt our friendship of so many years. In the future, I'll still treat you as my sister. If you have anything, you can always find me." Having said that, he lowered his voice. "There are too many people here now, don't be willful, go back." "Victor." I interrupted him and took a step forward. He frowned. "Lilith, don't make a scene." I forced a smile and handed him the necklace around my neck. "This thing, it should be returned to its rightful owner." Seeing the necklace, Victor's face changed drastically. "What tricks are you playing again? Take back what's yours, and from now on we go our separate ways." Victor stared at me intently, his voice cold and piercing. "I don't care about that little money. If you don't want it, just throw it away." As soon as he finished speaking, I turned around and threw the necklace into the nearby trash can. "Throw away the other gifts I gave you too." After saying that, I turned and left without looking back. 2. Victor stood there, watching my back disappear. His face was still very ugly. People around him were busy smoothing things over. "Don't mind her, she's just trying to save face. Just you wait, Victor, she'll soon realize her mistake. I guess as soon as we leave, she'll regret it." Victor laughed when he heard this. "Let her toss and turn. If it weren't for the sake of our elders, who would care about her? Forget it, don't mind her. Tonight is a day worth celebrating, don't let her ruin your mood." Victor looked at his beautiful new girlfriend with tender eyes, completely forgetting the annoying face of Lilith. Anyway, tomorrow, Lilith would pretend nothing had happened. She would wait for him downstairs at the company building and insist on going into the elevator with him. He was already numb to this kind of trick. When they reached the top floor of Victor's villa, a heavy rain poured down. I stood alone in the rain with an umbrella, recalling the plot of the book I had recently read. In the book, because of Victor and Molly's confession, I made a huge scene hysterically, and in order to force him to break up, I ended my life here that night. But what was the result? I was hanging by a thread. Victor only stayed in the ward for a few minutes before leaving coldly. My father felt that as an illegitimate daughter, it was a loss of face for me to commit suicide. Coupled with Victor's indifferent attitude, he determined that I had lost my value. He forced me to marry a wealthy businessman who was over a decade older than me, and from then on, I lost my freedom in a gilded cage. After that, I was depressed and eventually died in a foreign land. After my death, it was the person I had always been afraid to approach who collected my broken body. And Victor was immersed in the sweetness of his new marriage, never appearing. These days, the plot of the book has been playing out in reality one by one. If it weren't for the warning of the plot, I would probably have been frantically contacting Victor at this moment. And then threatening him with my life, ready to jump. This novel made me incredibly grateful, as if it had given me a second chance, allowing me to gradually reverse the destined tragic trajectory. When I dialed the number for the second time, the other party finally answered. I held the phone tightly and pressed it gently against my ear. The 3 words Uriah lingered on my lips for a long time, and finally I called out softly. The pouring rain isolated all the sounds of the world. Only Uriah's slightly tired voice could be heard, low and deep. Lilith? Uriah, it's raining heavily outside. I'm trapped on the roof of your villa, can you come pick me up? There was a moment of silence on the other end of the phone, and I nervously clutched the umbrella. My palms were covered in cold sweat. In the book, Uriah cried when he collected my remains. Warm tears fell on my already decayed body. Even in my imagination, I could feel that heat. From then on, he carried my earring with him and lived a lonely life. He spent the rest of his life alone. I couldn't help but cry, choking on my sobs. What are you crying for? Uriah's voice suddenly came. It was still the same indifferent tone, even a little impatient. I didn't say I wouldn't go. Then when are you coming? Wait, I'll be there in 10 minutes. Okay, I'll wait for you, Uriah. He didn't speak again and hung up the phone. 5 minutes later, I put my umbrella in the corner. So when Uriah arrived, I was already soaked to the bone. When he pushed open the door to the rooftop, his lips were pressed tightly together, and his face was as cold as frost. I brushed my wet hair back and smiled brightly at him. Uriah, you're so punctual. Lilith, you might as well just die. He looked at me coldly and grabbed my arm, pulling me under the umbrella. When he reached the stairs, he threw a soft blanket at me. Wipe yourself off, don't get my clothes dirty. He glanced at me from the corner of the stairs and strode down briskly. Oh. I wrapped the blanket around myself obediently, and couldn't help but secretly look at him walking ahead. When he had no expression, he always looked very cold and hard to approach. There were many girls in the circle who liked him, but no one dared to confess. He and Victor were half-brothers, but their temperaments were completely different. Victor was arrogant and unruly, while Uriah was cold and aloof. I often went to Victor's villa, and every time I went, Uriah looked like he hated me. And now, although he came to pick me up, his attitude was still cold. When he pulled me into the stairs just now, his grip was especially strong. My wrist still hurts, and there's a red mark around it. There was no way to tell that he had always been secretly in love with me. 3. I slowly lowered my eyelashes. Everything in the book happened exactly as it was written. But now, because of my changes, many things have changed as well. Would Uriah still like me? If he doesn't like me at all, wouldn't I be causing him trouble by doing this? Home? Uriah suddenly turned to look at me. My heart skipped a beat, and I blurted out. Yeah, to your house. Uriah stopped and sneered. Victor won't be back tonight. I know. I clutched the edge of the blanket, twisting it bit by bit. I'm not looking for him. The stairwell suddenly fell silent. Uriah turned around, his gaze as cold as ice. Lilith, don't use me as a pawn in your game. I really didn't. He stared at me for a moment and took out his phone. I'll have my driver take you back. Uriah. I bit my lower lip hard and snatched his phone away. Lilith. He looked at me, but there was no anger or disgust in his eyes. In those deep eyes, there was a complex emotion that couldn't be explained. My heart suddenly ached. 4. Uriah, I don't want to go home. Everyone is laughing at me. I have nowhere else to go. Can you let me stay here for one night? I hid his phone behind my back, my voice gradually getting smaller. Of course, if you really hate me and don't want to see me, then forget it. As soon as I finished saying this, tears uncontrollably welled up in my eyes. One by one, they fell silently. Uriah didn't speak, he just gently took my hand. He helped me down the stairs and through the courtyard. Finally, he stopped in front of a room on the second floor of the villa. I followed him into the room. He took a clean shirt from the closet and handed it to me. The bathroom is over there. He was tall, and the shirt looked especially loose on me. It covered my hips like a short dress. After taking a shower, I only wore this shirt and walked out with bare legs. He glanced at me and then averted his gaze. I sat down on the bed. The wet hair dripped water, soaking the sheets. My body, after bathing, was filled with his usual fragrance. The same scent filled the small space. An ambiguous atmosphere spread silently. He picked up the cigarette case and coughed lightly. I'm going to the balcony to smoke a cigarette. Then he walked towards the balcony. I curiously looked around his bedroom. The dark gray bedding was spotless. The notebook and files on the desk were neatly arranged. Just as I was about to take a closer look at the items on the desk, the phone rang suddenly. The screen displayed Victor's incoming call. I chose not to answer. But he kept calling in, as if he wouldn't give up until he got his way. I simply silenced the phone and stuffed it back into my bag. Uriah! I called out to the balcony. He quickly extinguished his cigarette and turned around. What's wrong? I sat on the edge of the bed and looked up at his tall figure. Our eyes met for a moment, then he looked away. But I noticed his ears turned red. I wet the bedsheet. What should I do tonight? He glanced at me, then at the water stains. His Adam's apple rolled noticeably, and then he took out a hairdryer. Dry your hair first, I'll change the sheets. As he said that, he went to the closet to search. Seeing his red ears, I couldn't help but laugh secretly. When I came out after drying my hair, he had already laid out new sheets. Go to sleep. What about you? He pulled up a chair and didn't look back. I'll look at some documents. Oh. I sat on the bed a little disappointedly. Just as he was about to open the folder, his phone rang. 5. He looked at the screen, then glanced back at me before answering the call. Victor, what's up? My heart pounded and I held my breath. Yeah, I'm home. You said someone saw Lilith come to your house? Uriah turned to look at me. Before he could finish, I quickly got up. I sat lightly on his lap, my arms around his neck. When he tried to push me away, I whispered in his ear. Tell him I'm not here. I could feel his skin suddenly become hot. The veins on the side of his neck were clearly visible, rising and falling with his breath. His heart was beating rapidly, and his Adam's apple kept bobbing. I looked up at him, and he looked down at me. His eyes gradually became deep and hazy. No, she's been home. She's not here, you can ask the others. After saying that, he hung up the phone directly. He threw away the phone and his long fingers clasped my waist through his shirt. He pressed me tightly against him. A hot temperature came through the fabric. My heart skipped a beat, and I instinctively wanted to escape. But he tightened his arms. Lilith. His voice became low and hoarse. Warm breath brushed against my ear and neck. I wanted to dodge, but he kissed my lips. Don't tease me like this, I don't want to do this to you here. Uriah! I twisted my body slightly, trying to change my position. The burning heat became even more intense. Taking advantage of the gap between breaths, I finally spoke. If you don't want to touch me, why are you kissing me? He rested his forehead against mine, breathing lightly. His eyes were closed as if he was calming down. And besides, your kissing skills are really bad, my lips are swollen. Lilith. He didn't open his eyes. The hand that was pinching my waist relaxed slightly. His fingers were long and strong, pressing against the hollow of my waist through my shirt. It was both painful and unbearable. Uriah. I frowned and tried to push his hand away, but he grabbed my fingers. Don't move, Lilith. I'll be gentler this time. As soon as he finished speaking, his palm supported my lower back, pulling me into his arms. This kiss was lingering and gentle, but then it became deep and intense. Uriah. I gently punched him and bit him when I took a breath. Lilith. His voice was already hoarse. All the muscles in his body were tense. The temperature of his palms was almost melting me. 6. Uriah suddenly buried his face in the crook of my neck, letting out a low growl. The tide of passion receded, only to quickly return. Uriah gently pushed me away and pulled me to my feet. I noticed a strange expression on his face. There was a special atmosphere in the air. I couldn't help but ask, what was that about? His ears were burning red. The usually cold and aloof man was now filled with intense desire in his eyes. I'm going to take a shower. He stood up and bent down to tidy up my messy shirt. You rest first. Before he finished speaking, he hurried into the bathroom. As the sound of water started, I turned over on his bed. I reached out and touched my burning face. I seemed to understand something. It's just that he was tall and well-built, with well-defined muscles. He had a high nose bridge and a sharp jawline. His fingers were long and strong. He didn't seem like the type who would easily lose control. Could it be that he had never had a girlfriend before? And he had never been intimate with a girl? Thinking about it, a sweet feeling welled up in my heart. I lay on his pillow, but accidentally touched a Swarovski earring. The earring was very familiar. It was one of my favorite pairs. Once I came to Victor's dorm, one of them disappeared and I couldn't find it no matter how hard I looked. It turned out he had been cherishing it all along. I suddenly remembered. In the plot, this earring was always with him. I was stunned for a while, then I put the earring back where it was. The sound of the hairdryer stopped. When Uriah came out, he was wearing a deep blue pajama. After bathing, his skin had a healthy glow. His hair hung down softly, and his usually sharp temperament had diminished. For some reason, I thought he looked a little cute at this moment. Just as I was about to call out to him, there was a sound of voices outside the door. I froze instantly. In the voice outside the door, there was clearly Victor's. Uriah's face changed too, but he reacted faster than me. The moment the doorknob turned, my clothes had been stuffed under the bed by him. My shoes were hidden at the very back of the bed. And he was just pulling back the covers to get into bed. Only one bedside lamp was turned on in the room, and the light was dim. I hid deep in the bed. There was only a slight bulge. Even if Victor came closer, he wouldn't notice anything unusual unless he looked carefully. Brother, why are you going to bed so early today? Victor asked in confusion. 7. My head hurts a little from getting wet in the rain. Uriah said, but under the covers, he gently grasped my restless wrist. The blanket wasn't big, and he was so tall and took up a lot of space. My body was almost completely against his. His breath brushed lightly against his waist. I could clearly feel his body tensing. All right then. The room was still dark. Victor leaned against the door, taking out his phone and checking his contacts. After making several calls that went unanswered, he was obviously annoyed. Brother, do you think Lilith is doing this on purpose? What? I just confessed to Molly today, and then she pulls this stunt. The news just said there was a woman who seemed to be trying to end her life. I was worried something had happened, so I rushed over. But it wasn't her at all. I called her countless times, but I couldn't get through. Victor slammed his phone down hard. She's clearly deliberately sabotaging my date. Speaking of which, Victor sneered. It seems I'll never be able to get rid of her. Not necessarily. Uriah suddenly spoke. Victor was a little surprised. Not necessarily? Brother, you've seen all the trouble she's caused you over the years. Don't you hate her to death and never give her a good look? Hearing this, I bit his waist hard. He winced in pain and instinctively reached out to block me, but his fingertips accidentally touched my lips. I took the opportunity to put his finger in my mouth. His whole body trembled, and a slight gasp escaped his throat. Brother, what's wrong with you? Nothing, my calf is cramping a little. His voice was hoarse, and he coughed twice to cover it up. Then you should get some rest, I won't disturb you. Victor got up and said, I'll just go to the bathroom and leave. The moment the bathroom door closed, I suddenly remembered something. I had washed my socks when I took a shower earlier. They were still hanging in the bathroom. 8. Brother, is there a woman in your room? Victor asked with an ambiguous smile on his face, coming out a moment later. You're really hiding her well. Which beauty is so capable? Don't talk nonsense. Victor walked towards the bed. Going to sleep so early, could it be that there's someone in the bed? Victor. His tone turned cold. Okay, I won't get closer. Victor stopped. But he looked meaningfully at the bed. Do you need a condom? I have a spare one here. Uriah gently held the back of my neck under the covers, fixing me against him. Turning to look at Victor, his voice carried a hint of coldness. Don't joke like that. Are you serious? Victor seemed a little surprised. Uriah pursed his lips, his throat moving. Yes. If the room were brighter, you could see how painful his expression was. He kept pressing on the back of my neck. But I could still move freely in other parts. And it was invisible under the covers. So I gently stroked his abdomen. With each touch, his body tensed up more. As my fingers continued down, touching the line of his waist, his whole body trembled. This reaction startled me. Then I'll be going, I won't disturb you. Victor glanced at the bed meaningfully, with a hint of contempt in his heart. This brother who was aloof from women, who was usually indifferent to the opposite sex and seemed unapproachable. It turned out he was just like that, not a chaste person at all. If he guessed correctly, there must be a girl hiding in the bed. It was really fun. But Victor didn't want to expose it either. Their relationship was still pretty good, although he was a little jealous of his brother's popularity with girls. But overall, they got along well. Victor left the room. As soon as the door closed, I immediately pushed off the covers. I'm suffocating. 9. Uriah leaned against the headboard, his gaze fixed intently on me. The dim light outlined his perfect profile, vaguely visible in the shadows. I was a little dazed. People often say that beauty is more moving in the light. The same goes for men. The hazy light made him even more charming. Lilith. He slowly sat up straight, arranging my disheveled hair. Cupping my face in his hands, he said seriously, I've never disliked you. Nor have I been cold to you. Don't mind what he said. After saying that, he let go of my hand, got up and got out of bed. You rest. Where are you going? He picked up a cigarette and pointed to the balcony. Smoke a cigarette and then sleep. Then I suddenly sneezed. His steps stopped. I grabbed the hem of his clothes and said aggrievedly, My head hurts so much, I might have caught a cold. He looked at me for a moment. Let go first, I'll get you some medicine. After taking the medicine, I still refused to let go of him. This quilt is so cold, I'm cold. This time he broke free from me. Victor is gone, no need to act. What does that have to do with him? He laughed self-deprecatingly. Why did you go to the top floor of the villa? Only then did I realize. It turned out that he had heard Victor mention the news about a woman jumping off a high-rise building, so he misunderstood. He thought I wanted to be unhappy, so I went to the roof. Calling him to pick me up was to get back at Victor. I can understand why he would think that. For years, Molly's family has been very harsh on me. My mother was ashamed of me as an illegitimate child. My father didn't care about me. If it weren't for the benefits of the marriage, I would have barely been allowed to stay. For me, Victor was like a lifeline. We grew up together. There should be some feelings. I hope he can help me. I pinned all my hopes on him. But to others, it all became evidence of my obsession with him. Especially Uriah. As Victor's elder brother, he must have witnessed many of my entanglements. Uriah. I wanted to explain. But he had already stood up. Remember to set an alarm, leave early tomorrow morning, don't be seen by anyone. After all, it's not good for your girl's reputation. Wait. He didn't stop, nor did he turn around. I gritted my teeth and said, "You kissed me so many times just now. And you did that kind of thing. Shouldn't you take responsibility?" He stopped abruptly, turned to look at me. I sat on the bed, tears welling up in my eyes. "I know you hate me. You never paid any attention to me when I came here before. Thank you for picking me up and taking me in tonight. If you really don't want anything to do with me, I'll leave now." I got off the bed. I walked out barefoot, not even bothering to put on my shoes. As I passed him, tears couldn't stop flowing. "Lilith." He grabbed my hand. I said I didn't hate you. Then are you willing to take responsibility? I shook him off and raised my head stubbornly. "You kissed me, you hugged me. And that." He suddenly clamped my chin and kissed me deeply. "Lilith." His breathing became heavy as their lips met. "Since you insist on provoking me, don't try to escape." I wrapped my arms around his waist and stood on tiptoes to return the kiss. "Okay." I took a few days off and went to the city where the wealthy businessman I was going to marry was located in the book. I stayed there for 3 days. When I left, that evil scumbag had already been arrested by the police and was awaiting legal sanctions. 11. He glanced down at me and chuckled. "The bottom's not bad either, want to give it a try?" I poked his firm abdomen and teased in a low voice. "You're just a little eager, aren't you? Lilith." He shook his head helplessly, but couldn't suppress his youthful vigor, his eyes full of challenge. "You're in for it. Don't beg for mercy later, crying won't help." Victor invited many people from the circle to his birthday party tonight. Molly dressed up specially today and looked stunningly beautiful. Sitting together, they were a perfect match. Molly was flattered by the compliments from other female stars. Her gaze kept glancing at the person beside her, only to find him a little absent-minded. "Victor." She called out several times before he came back to his senses. "What's wrong? It's not early anymore. Everyone's hungry. Don't worry, everyone hasn't arrived yet. Who else are we waiting for?" "Yeah, who else hasn't come?" "Uriah hasn't arrived yet." "Oh, I remember, Lilith hasn't come yet." "Will Lilith come?" "Lilith won't miss this kind of occasion, right?" Victor suddenly interrupted everyone. "I didn't invite her at all. If she dares to come, I'll have the security guards kick her out." "Victor, don't be angry, it's your birthday today." Molly gently comforted him. "Don't ruin your mood for someone unimportant, okay? You're right." Victor looked at his girlfriend beside him. Molly was indeed beautiful. Lilith was beautiful too, but not in such a dazzling way. The first time he saw Molly, he was deeply attracted by her temperament. Only after getting to know her did he realize that she was just that. For the past month, Lilith hadn't been waiting for him downstairs at the company. She didn't pester him to eat together or attend social events together. She suddenly disappeared from his world. Even when they occasionally met at the company, she would turn around and avoid him. Victor had to admit that he was very uncomfortable. Yes, he attributed all this to the change in his pace of life. He was just not used to not having someone always around him. He didn't have that kind of feeling for Lilith. And he wouldn't offend his family for a bastard child. But they had known each other for many years after all. Victor thought, just tonight. If she couldn't hold back and came to find him. He didn't even need her to be humble. As long as she showed a little vulnerability, he would always give her a chance. The door of the private room was suddenly pushed open. Guess who I met outside? The incoming agent was full of gossip, but his eyes were fixed on the birthday boy. Who is it? Don't play dumb. That's it. Who did you meet? Could it be her? You guessed it right. Victor, we've always said that she would definitely not let you go. So impatient. Victor didn't speak, but the gloomy expression on his face obviously eased a lot. Molly's expression changed, and she grabbed Victor's clothes. She spoke in a small voice with, Victor, can you let Lilith leave? I feel very uncomfortable with her chasing you like that before. Victor looked at Molly and felt that she was much more pleasing to the eye than before. The annoyance in his heart also dissipated. But Lilith's performance in the past few days had really made him angry. Even if he was willing to let it go now, he had to teach her a lesson. Okay, let her go then. Victor gently pinched Molly's cheek and replied casually. Who wants to leave? 12. The door was suddenly pushed open and Uriah strode in. His voice was not loud, but it struck like a heavy hammer, chilling. It carried an indescribable sense of oppression. The huge box was instantly silent. Everyone present was stunned. Beside Uriah stood a girl. That girl was none other than Lilith. Victor sat still in his seat. But the goblet he was playing with was suddenly crushed to pieces. Molly cried out in horror. You're hurt, Victor. You're bleeding. Get out. Victor? I told you to get out. Don't you understand human language? Victor stood up abruptly and slammed the shattered goblet on the ground. Molly was stunned for a moment before bursting into tears and rushing out. The others in the box also left wisely. Victor's hand hung at his side, blood dripping continuously onto the ground. But he seemed to feel no pain, his eyes fixed on Uriah. After a long silence, he pointed at me. You're not going to explain this? My hand was held tightly by Uriah, and his grip was even stronger. His palm was warm and strong, giving a strange sense of security. What explanation? Why is Lilith here with you? You invited me to bring a date to the birthday party, forgot? Uriah pulled my hand and put me in his arms. Victor instantly became like a furious beast. He picked up a glass from the table and smashed it hard on the ground. Do you know who Lilith is? She's mine. Whose? Your girlfriend or fiancée? Uriah did not retreat. Does everyone who used to like you belong to you forever? Victor's eyes were bloodshot, and they were blood red. You know how she feels about me, and you still want to come between us? Victor, it's not what you think. I gently squeezed Uriah's hand and looked directly at Victor. 13. I took the initiative. And I don't like you, or rather, I haven't liked you for a long time. I looked at him and suddenly realized that I had let go. After all, any girl with a little self-esteem wouldn't like someone who never respected her. Nor would she like someone who was cold and indifferent, who treated her like a possession. Perhaps there were some vague feelings during the years we grew up together. But after my status as a love child was exposed and his attitude changed drastically, those feelings had long since vanished. Lilith, what are you saying? Victor seemed to have heard some big joke. You almost ended your life for me, and now you say you don't like me? I never thought about ending my life for you. When I went to the rooftop that night, I was just looking for an excuse for Uriah to pick me up. Victor was suddenly stunned. After a long while, he stared at me with bloodshot eyes and spoke word by word through gritted teeth. So, the person in Uriah's bed that night was you? Yes, it was me. Victor, just go on with your love life. I said that night that I would never bother you again. I'll never go back on that. After saying that, I didn't look at him again. I pulled Uriah and turned to leave. Uriah, let's go home. I want to see what the new house looks like. But Uriah didn't move. He looked at Victor, his eyes were calm but with a sharp pressure. Victor, I don't want to hear anyone slander my girlfriend. Victor was completely broken and spoke recklessly. Uriah, who do you think you are? Uriah just smiled coldly. If you don't know who I am, why don't you go home and ask your father? Victor suddenly quieted down. His gaze shifted from Uriah's face to mine. His originally handsome face now had an indescribable ugliness. Lilith. Uriah doesn't know yet that you're not actually the daughter of the Molly family. It's not very honorable to hide such a big thing from him, don't you think? Although I was prepared for my identity to be revealed to the world. But being suddenly exposed by Victor like this was still a bit embarrassing and helpless. The hand that Uriah was holding was almost instantly stiff and cold. Cold sweat seeped out of my palm, layer by layer. Perhaps seeing my face turn pale, Victor laughed. It seems that you really have been hiding it from him. I told you, if he knew your real background, Uriah would definitely stay away from you. Even if you threw yourself at him, he wouldn't want you at all. Victor. Uriah let go of my hand. He coldly adjusted his sleeves. Then he took off his watch and handed it over. Before, I just thought you were a heartless and promiscuous person, but not so disgusting. But now I find out. Uriah stepped forward, grabbed Victor's collar, and pressed him hard against the wall. You're not just a scumbag. Victor was furious and wanted to fight back, but Uriah punched him hard in the face. You're also a coward, a waste. And Victor, I'm not like you. I don't like any Molly family daughter. I only have Lilith in my heart. It doesn't matter what her name is, I love her for who she is. But her past has. Uriah didn't let him finish and gave him another fierce punch. Victor fell to the ground with a cry, his nose bleeding and looking miserable. I was worried that the situation would get out of control. I immediately rushed forward to stop him. Stop it, it will be trouble if someone gets hurt. Uriah looked gloomy, but still stopped. He glanced at Victor, who was covered in blood, and took out his phone to call someone to deal with it. Then he pulled me into his arms. Let's go home, Lilith. Before getting into the car, I suddenly said, Uriah, do you believe me? What? I looked up at him. He was wearing a dark gray shirt, elegant and handsome. The way he had just angrily attacked. If it were me before, I would definitely be scared and run away, but now I felt warm. During that time, I struggled desperately like grasping a lifeline. But it always backfired. Leaving my biological mother who had once loved me, I came to my father and stepmother. Although they didn't hit or scold me, the kind of cold violence that looked down on me was enough to destroy the psychological defenses of a girl in her adolescence. The playmates I grew up with also began to dislike and reject me. The entire Molly family were greedy scum. I was terrified every day, afraid of being sent to that hell. But I didn't know that someone was secretly guarding me. Fortunately, the nightmare didn't repeat itself. I didn't go to extremes and pester Victor. Between me and Victor, it's clean. Lilith. Uriah cupped my face and kissed me deeply. I grabbed his sleeve, my fingertips trembling slightly. Uriah. When I was about to suffocate, my legs went weak, and I could only lean against him. His lips moved to my neck. Lilith, none of this matters. But I'm glad to hear you say it. After all, men are a little petty in this kind of thing. I understand. I told you the truth because I don't want him to slander me. For you, and for myself. Saying that, I smiled at him and rubbed against him again. It's so cold, let's go home quickly. He held my hand tightly. From then on, they never separated again. 14. Before my relationship with Uriah became public, I made a special trip to the Molly family and talked to the elders for an entire afternoon. In the end, thanks to the mediation of Molly, the eldest daughter of the Molly family, I finally severed all ties with the Molly family. I chose this timing because I knew the Molly family's character too well. If they knew about Uriah and me, they would definitely harass us endlessly. I didn't want Uriah and the Victor family to be involved in this trouble. When I was leaving, Molly's mother was very unhappy. "I've raised you for so many years and spent so much money, and you've given me nothing in return." My mindset is completely different now. Although I suffered a bit in the Molly family over the years, I didn't end up on the streets. And Molly, her attitude towards me changed unexpectedly. Think about being forced to drop out of school and being sent back to a wealthy businessman to marry. She was the one who pushed it behind the scenes. But now, she was speaking up for me, helping me to untie my heart. And she also persuaded Molly's mother not to spread my background everywhere. At this moment, I was Lilith, free from constraints. No more chains could bind me. I was satisfied. "Madam." I bowed respectfully to Molly's mother. "I will never forget your kindness in raising me." Smooth talker. Molly's mother glanced at me coldly. "You can't even handle someone you grew up with. What future can you have? Just go, you're annoying to look at." Molly's mother waved impatiently. I didn't say anything more. I gave Molly a glance. "Mom, let me walk Lilith out." As soon as Molly finished speaking, Molly's mother's expression softened immediately. "Come back for dinner early." "Okay." Molly replied and took me out of the living room. When we reached the depths of the courtyard, we stopped involuntarily. Our eyes met, and we couldn't help but smile at each other. "Sister." I stepped forward and hugged her. "Thank you so much." At that moment, Molly said softly, "Lilith, please forgive me." Although some things were not explicitly stated, we both knew. This apology must have been said to the Lilith in the novel. My eyes were wet, and she was also in tears. As we parted, she held my hand tightly. "Lilith, I hope you can find true happiness this time." "I will, and you be happy too, sister." The first time I visited Victor's parents, I was very nervous. Victor's mother has been devoted to Buddhism in recent years. She would go to the temple to worship on the 1st and 15th day of every lunar month. Don't worry, since my mom started learning Buddhism, her personality has become more charitable, and besides, Dad always listens to Mom. Seeing my uneasiness, Uriah kept comforting me. But the closer I got to my destination, the more flustered I became. "Or, shall we come back another day? I'm so nervous." I grabbed the corner of his clothes and dared not go any further. "Look, Mom is already coming out to greet us," Uriah said helplessly. I saw Victor's mother walking down the steps towards us. I had no choice but to pluck up my courage and go forward with Uriah. "Mom, this is Lilith." "Hello, Auntie, my name is Lilith." I quickly greeted her and handed over the gift I had prepared. Victor's mother took the gift and kept looking at me. After entering the living room, she still focused on me. Then she suggested taking me to the upstairs study to talk. I was a little scared and subconsciously looked to Uriah for help. But Victor's mother gently took my hand. "Don't be nervous, let's have a chat between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law," she jokingly said to her son. "Don't worry, I won't bully your little girlfriend." Hearing this, I blushed instantly. "Auntie." Victor's mother seemed to be in a good mood and kept holding my hand. "Theo, look at Lilith, she is exactly as I described, both beautiful and likable." Mr. Song was a refined entrepreneur. He smiled and agreed. "This girl is indeed very good, gentle and charming." I was a little confused, not understanding what was going on. Victor's mother held my hand tightly, tears welling up in her eyes. "Lilith, I have to tell you something strange. I've been having the same dream for years. I dreamed that Uriah never married because of a girl. And he died alone in middle age. At first, his father and I thought it was just a dream. But the other scenes in the dream actually came true one by one." Victor's mother cried. "I've been devoutly worshipping Buddha for all these years, all for Uriah. I'm always worried that the ominous prophecy will come true. I've been praying that if that girl really exists, I hope she can be with Uriah. The moment I saw you, I knew my prayer had been answered. Lilith, you must cherish each other and grow old together. Unknowingly, my tears also streamed down my face. In this world, there are my cruel biological parents. There are also loving elders like Victor's mother. I am so lucky to meet Uriah and such a warm family. To make up for the regrets of the dream. 15. We got our marriage certificate the year we graduated. Our wedding was being planned. I wanted to keep it simple, but Victor's family insisted on a grand ceremony. After getting the certificate, I moved into Uriah's place. While he was taking a shower, I found the lost earring under my pillow again. This time, I put it directly in my ear. And that was the only piece of jewelry I wore. When he came out of the shower, I was pretending to be asleep under the covers, wrapped up tightly. Lilith? He leaned down and kissed my cheek. The itchy sensation made my eyelashes flutter, but I kept my eyes closed. I seemed to hear him chuckle softly, and he kissed me again before getting into bed. The moment he lifted the covers, he froze in place. Lilith. The soft nightlight cast a warm glow. It illuminated my body, and the pearls around my ears sparkled, faintly visible. The curves of my body were highlighted in the interplay of light and shadow. It was as seductive as a cherry nestled in a jade plate. I was so embarrassed that my whole body stiffened and I dared not move. Seeing Uriah's expression at that moment, my nervousness instantly disappeared. I sat up and threw myself into his arms, wrapping my arms around his neck. Just like that night at his apartment, I leaned close to his ear. Uriah, do you like it? You're so stunned. I could feel his body tense instantly. His temperature was rising, his skin was burning hot, as if his blood was about to boil. I turned my head and my soft lips brushed against the protruding vein on his neck. I gently nibbled on his neck, feeling his tremble. It was as if a dam had suddenly burst. Or like a dormant volcano suddenly erupted. Uriah instantly took the initiative and pressed me down on the bed. His kiss was forceful and deep. I could hardly bear it. I felt like I was about to be crushed by him. Lilith. His low voice echoed in my ear, filled with endless tenderness. At the last moment, he kissed me gently again. Bite me if it hurts. I closed my eyes and softly hummed. My nails scratched his back, and I left deep teeth marks on his shoulder. But it still hurt so much. Tears uncontrollably flowed from my eyes. Uriah. I looked at him tearfully, feeling a little wronged. The frenzy in his eyes scared me a little. I subconsciously thought that he couldn't stop himself. But Uriah stopped all his movements and held me in his warm embrace. I hugged his waist and recalled the scene of our separation at the airport. I couldn't help but ask. Didn't you say that if I begged or cried, it wouldn't work? The desire in his eyes was still strong. You could tell from his expression how tormented he was and how hard he was trying to control himself. He wrapped his arms tightly around me and said in a hoarse voice, I can't bear it. Darling. Tell me how you feel. But he didn't answer, he just tightened his embrace. You're not going to say anything? I looked up at him and smiled mischievously. Then I'll keep my words of love in my heart. Uriah looked at me sharply. Beneath the surging desire in his eyes, there was an endless depth of affection. After a long time, he spoke softly. At the moment we first met. Lilith, I originally thought I would never have a chance to let you know. My heart suddenly ached. Don't worry, every moment from now on will be ours. Yes, every day of the future belongs to you and me. Our fingers were unknowingly intertwined. When I looked up to kiss him, he also lowered his head and kissed me gently. Uriah, I don't seem to hurt anymore. Do you want to continue? The sound of ambiguous panting echoed in the room. It didn't subside for a long time. This night was destined to be sleepless. And even more touching was the long life we were about to share.